know, there's a lot of literature out there about China's international orientation. A lot of people look at China's foreign policy in terms of strategy. I don't think that's the way to look at China's foreign policy choice. It's best to look at it in terms of a process. Essentially what the government is trying to do, this Communist Party is trying to do, is to manage this two transition domestically and internationally, to manage its again economic transition, and at the same time manages China's rise and the evolving international system. It tries to adapt to the international system, to join, to participate, but at the same time trying to bring changes to those system elements they don't like, and to realign certain elements of the international system. And that's if you want to use the economist Albert Hirschman's categories, essentially it's exit the compliance part, participation, but at the same time voice, that is change through participation. And the third part, I personally add to, is balancing, that is self-strengthening in terms of its power. They realize you don't have anything if you don't have power. Power comes from one, self-strengthening, including military modernization, very robust one, 07-08, 18% military expenditure increase, and that trend will continue. And also self-power balancing through partnership diplomacy, for example, with Russia. Why? Why does China view the world this way? Why does China sort of pursue its interest in this fashion abroad? I think there's three factors. One is how they look at the world system. There was a debate in the early 1990s whether the world was becoming multipolar or the world remains to be unipolar. In the end, finally came to the realization, despite the fluctuation for the multipolar system, it's not coming, it's not here. The reality is the U.S. Western coalition has become very dominant. So that creates, that basically dissuades any notion that somehow a fundamentally restructured system is out there, is worthwhile, can be done. So you can't really imagine an alternative world order that is built on what China wishes. So that creates a constraint. On the other hand, we're talking about U.S. hegemony. And the U.S. hegemony tends to promote ideas of free trade, open economic competition, globalization, right? So, and in terms of policy towards rising powers such as China, the United States are pursuing engagement policy, which essentially says, there's a seat at the great power table, but so long as you behave like one, there's a seat you can for you. So, so that creates sort of the sense of opportunity within the system. That is, you can achieve your domestic agenda of stable economic growth under the one-party dictatorship, and also achieve your international aspirations and maintain your security working within the system. And finally, how the government defines, the ruling party defines the national interest. Again, they realize with the end of the Cold War, essentially it was a reform and opening up. Communism as an official ideology is essentially gone bankrupt. As Thomas Christensen at Princeton would like to say, if you're not communist, you must be more Chinese, which means nationalism becomes a key source of legitimacy. But that's not enough, right? Then you need economic performance, you need economic prosperity, stable growth. So how do you do that? You need to join the world, you need to participate in the global market. Again, you need to cultivate good ties with the advanced economies, including Japan, US, and West. So that, I think those are the factors that explain, again, how they look at the world and how they make the foreign policy choice. Implications. What are the implications? Let me just offer three. One is, given that the Chinese sort of international process really does not neatly fit into any international theories, traditional conventional wisdom. So I think what we ought to do is the best policy is really, we need really creative thinking in terms of how to deal with China to effectively address its pursuit of power, recognition, and acceptance and participation. And secondly, everybody wants to be tough, right? You got to have, strengthen the constraints to make sure that wayward behavior, aggression do not happen. But at the same time, we also ought to should not categorize issues in terms of us and them kind of strategic hostility. That is to reassure them that, in the long run, we're still welcoming you to join the great power club. Again, so long as you comply with the standards, to behave like a responsible great power. Several years ago, Deputy Secretary of State Robert Zoellick gave a speech, essentially, that's a very important speech on U.S.-China relationship. In essence, he basically welcomed China to become a responsible stakeholder in the international system. And that's essentially the message, right? And by the way, stakeholder does not spell as S-T-E-A-K. It's S-T-E. And finally, I'm done. And finally, really, the U.S.-China relationship should not be viewed in isolation. Instead, it should be viewed in terms of how you renew the global U.S. leadership. China, based on what I outlined earlier, clearly respond to much bigger forces in the international system. On the one hand, you want to have this deterrent in terms of the whole material, institutional arrangement, but you also need to reassure China. So with this continuous support for globalization, shared governance, and openness of the international system. With that, I'm open for questions. 30 minutes.
So, what do you see China's role in the future with Western and North Korean negotiations?
The 6-party talks. How many rounds now? 6 rounds. So I sometimes joke that those people, the 6 parties, right, representative love picking ducks so much. Maybe just they just cannot help it. We want to keep going back again and again. I think this process is going to continue. Beijing will continue to be the host. There's some talk with Japan. Why not Japan? Why not U.S.? Why don't we host here? I think because of the different elements, I think Beijing will continue to be the host. 6-party talks, as a process will continue. There's just no alternative. North Korea, the Korean Peninsula, is the land of lousy choice. If you want to pursue diplomatic, war is not an option because of the close proximity, large population to the DMZ, quick escalation of war. It's just South Korea is vehemently against any use of force, so basically that takes the war out of the equation. Now, if you want to pursue diplomatic track, then you have to rely on the 6-party talks. We'll continue. But I see actually, if somebody asks me what is the biggest change the Obama administration is going to bring U.S. Asian policy, I think Korean issues maybe the one. That does not mean that the 6-party talks will be abandoned. What I mean is the Obama administration may return back to this Clinton arrangement, that is give the North Korean the grand package, grand bargain. Yes, that is, I'm going to recognize you politically, protect security, give you security reassurance. Instead, you give me your weapon program. You dismantle comprehensively, irreversibly your weapon program. And that's what Clinton administration was trying to do. I think very likely we may go back to that route. Yes.
To piggyback off of that question, a while back when we had a speaker specifically on North Korea, he said that the Chinese may string North Korea along because it's a thorn in the U.S. side, and they enjoy the status quo
China?
of the issue. So they may not be pushing North Korea as much as they could. Do you agree or disagree with that viewpoint?
I generally agree with that assessment. I don't think that they are going to push the bottom line. They don't want the regime collapse. Do they want denuclearization of Korea? Do they want a denuclearized Korean peninsula? Yes. Do they want the regime change? No. Do they want a speedy unification? Probably not. But again, so long as the process is focused on the denuclearization issue, so long as the process helps bring the six-party major powers together rather than driving them apart, they would continue to support the process. Yes.
So it's maybe a stupid question, but what exactly is a revisionist power?
Could you repeat the question?
Sorry, Sir, could you? What was the question again?
What is a revisionist?
What is a revisionist power? The revisionist power, as I outlined at the beginning, in the traditional international, maybe that's the reason why so many people didn't show up. What is revisionist power? It's the notion of rising power is going to fundamentally, oftentimes violently, redraft the rule of the game, change the system, as previously great powers did in history. Yes.
Sir, how do you think our new president-elect Obama is going to affect the Chinese mentality in international policies?
That's a very interesting question. You know, in the 1990s, especially in the 1990s, after the, for example, later bombing of the Chinese embassy, there was actually some talk, you know, from Chinese scholars, reputable scholars, about the U.S. Racist attitude toward the rising China, and that's sort of again tied to this kind of the traumatic experience of the Opium War, right? The 100 years of humiliation, and became a very powerful force. Even though they did not, a lot of them did not openly talk about it. But again, if you read carefully, as I did, you'll have what they write about, you know, how they do. Well, again, by established scholars from reputable schools. There was some talk about U.S. racism. You know, after the Obama election, I was, you know, actually the other day I was driving in the West, thought, you know, that's going to take the wind, right, out of the sail of this particular argument, and that's profound. That's a profound change, and you are going to. So it's very hard now for you to really make this kind of argument that the reason why China is asked to conform with international standards on human rights, on Sudan, on a whole set of issues, because the Americans are just racist. They just don't want China to rise, to take its place, you know, under the sun. So I think in that sense it's really a remarkable change.
As China is becoming, like you said, a rising great power, what is their approach to Russia?
Oh, Russia. Russia. You know, with the end of the Cold War, essentially, amongst the great powers, there was one black group, the dominant Western U.S. there, a coalition of advanced democracies, Europe, Japan. That group, in some way, was like a cool kids club in your high school. And left out were these essentially two emerging powers, and one, three actually. One is Russia, the other one is China. The Russians thought they were in after the end of the Cold War, initially, and Yeltsin and his advisors thought, hey, finally, with the end of the Cold War, we return back to the European, the family of Europe. And but the NATO expansion in 1993-4 really dealt a fatal kind of a psychological blow to that notion, and they feel that with the NATO expansion, it symbolizes the Western continued rejection, exclusion, and so Russia, after that, decided to seek relationship with China because they were really the two kids excluded from the cool kids club. I mean, that's a powerful thing, right? We all went through high school and we all want to be. Actually, my son, when he was 4 or 5 years old, the other day, they brought home 2 quarters. I said, son, where did you get the money? He said, Reese gave me the money. Now, why did they give you the money? Because he wanted to play with it.
Are you suggesting international relations is juvenile?
Yes. In fact, even worse than that. Great powers don't learn. I mean, that's why you have, as I said, a repetitive cycle of war. They're ants, and they just don't learn. I mean, you think about the notion, right? It's a structural argument. We do this simply because we're addicted by this anarchy. We have to be on top. We have to have as much power as we can, not just in absolute terms, but also in relative terms. That is more and much more than other great powers, which are all potential enemies. Who knows, right? Oh yes, probably, I think so. So anyway, let me come back to the China-Russian question. I think that really creates the common bond. And initially, India was also part of it, right? The long white, the long Western, and then now, in the past few years, all of a sudden, we started to focus on democracy. All of a sudden, because of the new democratic bond, India started to be wooed, right, to join the Western side. That's why we signed this. The last speaker was this. Last speaker.
The Belarus. The nuclear U.S. nuclear package.
Okay. Yeah. 06. Yeah. So that's what he was talking about. Essentially, you have this new kind of fault line between, right, Western cool kids, right, emerging non-Western powers, and India sort of sits in the middle, right? It's democratic, but at the same time, it's non-Western. It's a developing country. So the position of India all of a sudden takes significant strategic significance, and that's something India was never, ready. I mean, for years, the West, the U.S. pursue what is called an offshore balancing strategy, essentially to keep India to the subcontinent of South Asia. And all of a sudden, with the new strategic importance of India, India sort of now become increasingly assertive as a global player. It feels that this is their opportunity, right? So they are now applying for UN permanency, and it's joining all the organizations that can possibly join. They want to break free from the Southern Asia, the tide of rivalry, the ties of Kashmir with Pakistan. So that's, I think, the fundamental bond between China and Russia. But they're also very suspicious of each other, right? Because their ultimate goal is not to form their separate group. Fortunately, so far not, right? Because they both want to join the Cool Kids Club, right? That creates certainly a lot of problems of coordination, diplomatic trust.
Sir, you said that 65% of the Chinese economy, or excuse me, of the GDP is tied to foreign trade. How do you see the recent downturn in the global economy as impacting that, if at all?
Yeah, that's significantly right. You know, if your economy so much depends on trade, and for the economy, if American family like Professor Brandon Doherty family is going to cut back Christmas shopping, it's going to have a huge impact on some one family in southern China, in Sichuan, who have to produce shoes, right, for Professor Doherty. So it's going to have a huge. But if I were to give the Chinese leader a fortune cookie about this issue, essentially the fortune cookie would say, you know, consume more, you will prosper. I think what China needs to do is really to enhance its domestic consumption even more to redress the imbalance between. Essentially what happens is the U.S. spend too much, consume too much. Professor Doherty excluded. My wife has like 20 credit cards. It's just not sustainable. Even though it's not affect our marriage. And so you have that, and certainly affect the general kind of, you know, if trade becomes a problem, then factories are going to be closed.
I might add to that, if I may. Before the sudden meltdown of global economy, the Chinese economy, particularly in the coastal area, you see a lot of factories closing. That's because of the quality control issue. There's a global reverberation. For 20 years, and then China has become the world's factory. And people export a lot of times. And then dog food, and then, you know, milk powder, a lot of things. So you have a global regime to check on this sort of things. And I think that's actually one of the things that China has to catch up with the West. That is the global standard of quality and a lot of things. China, I think, is improving quite a bit. But on many aspects of that, China still has to do that. I think in that, regardless of the economic up and down globally, China has to deal with it because it's more structural and long term. In addition to the global consumption thing, the government has been trying to do this for, what, 15 years, and Zhu Rongji is going to stimulate domestic consumption. The Chinese people, you know, there's no economic security as much as we see, so they want to save money. So China has enormous amount of savings rate, and if you save money, you don't consume enough. That's why Chinese government gave Chinese a lot of holidays. The holidays, a week holiday, you go there to consume, to spend money. But still, they don't save. They don't spend. They don't save.
Right. Absolutely.
China's rapid economic growth and industrialization must have had an impact on its environmental resources. So what is the Chinese government doing in Canada to protect, its environment, and if any at all? And what is China's stance right now in terms of the international effort to prevent global warming?
I mean, this is. Previously was a development first, right? You got to see this as development and environmental protection as mutually contradictory. But now they're beginning to realize, in order to maintain sustainable growth, you really need to take care of the environment. So they are paying attention to it. But again, the imperative for economic growth, the need to maintain 9–10% of annual economic growth to generate enough jobs to maintain the basic semblance of social stability remains just so powerful, so strong. That really creates a kind of limit to extent in terms of its compliance. On the other hand, there was also an enforcement issue. Right? The central government may have real interest in enforcing more robust regulation and environmental protection, but local government, again, local village, and they have leaders, they all care about showing money, right? So you have that. They're the same in Chinese. China is huge. the sky is high, the emperor is far away. I mean, it is. It's hard to govern the country. Yes?
Sir, kind of to add to that question, how much do you think that environmental regulations, Kyoto and stuff like that, will play a role to that seat at the great power table that you were talking about? Kind of the West judging them as responsible enough or not? Do you think that'll be an issue in the future?
And this one is hard, the environmental issue. I'm not so sure if that is really a key element. Have we, United States, ratified the Kyoto Treaty yet?
No.
Then it clearly undermines, right, the power of that treaty in terms of generating the pressure for China to join, and increasingly clearly, as I said in presentation, with growing power, China and India, other developing countries, Russia and Brazil, and they are going to push for their own agenda. Look at the recent, Doha World Trade Organization negotiation. Essentially, India and China killed the whole round in terms of reducing agricultural subsidies, and the Doha round is dead because again, India and China and Brazil, newly developing countries, essentially push for their own agenda, banding together and say, you industrialized world should do more. You should reduce your agricultural subsidies, and that's really those two divergent positions became so irreconcilable and close to collapsing. And you're going to see more and more, this kind of exercise of newfound power from emerging powers such as China and India. Yes.
Do you think having the Olympics in China altered global perception, and if so, how?
The Olympic, say it again?
The Olympics in China, do you think having them there and just the opening ceremonies and everything, do you think it altered international perception of China?
Okay. I forgot to repeat the question.
That's I recorded everything.
Do you think the hosting the Olympic Games changed the global perception? Not in a fundamental way. I think it probably did more in changing its own self-perception. You reflect back on what happened in the Olympic Games. There was this, like in March, the Tibetan riot, right? Then you had the torch relay, a drama playing out on the global stage. Then you had this government heavy-handed control of stability order due for security reasons. And you also, on the sideline of the event, you heard about bombing attacks in Xinjiang, the west frontier, the Uyghur Muslim population area, right? So, the rise of great power, it's not like a sport event, 100 meter, or Michael Phelps, what's his sport? Swimming, right? This is 400 and then you're done. The great power is the process. I don't think there is a finish line in what's the stadium?
Bird's Nest.
The Bird's Nest. For China's arrival, it continues. It continues, and essentially they go back to the world goes back to its business. China goes back to take care of own issues, problems, as I outlined.
I think in the popular level, probably did a lot of changing. It's kind of a subtle way. Just to add what Professor Daniel said, if you recall, opening ceremony obviously is extravaganza. It shows the creativity of the Chinese artists, but also shows those who think China is a threat, and then you will be further confirmed with that, because bomb drum, beating the drums, it's pretty powerful and robust, right? Those think China is a great country, you know, culture of peace and culture, you will be confirmed that too, because you see this smiling babies, singing songs, and it's really very, very nice. So, and then if you're a China scholar somehow, and you will be much more nuanced. For example, if you recall, one of the most amazing television broadcasts was marathon running. They broadcast the whole thing, and to show the beautiful street of Beijing and people lining up to cheer the runners. And if you keep looking and watching this, you say, wow, the Beijing street is very, very wide and clean.
Right.
And not many people around. What a nice place. And then, if you know China, you know, where are the people? They were kicked out by the government. So that's what I'm saying is, you can say, you know, people, everybody in Beijing was encouraged by the government to avoid the Olympics. They call it 避孕. In Chinese, if you know, it's called contraception. It's basically, you know, you're allowed to do that kind of stuff. So that's why what I'm saying is, government can make this very, very extravagant and very beautiful, wonderful. People will believe it. On the other hand, the Chinese reality is still there. You know what I mean?
Good point. Yeah, maybe they stay at home watching TV, right? You know, this Olympic Games certainly illustrates in this point in a powerful way. That is, you know, how the system is structured. If the government sets its mind to do anything, you can achieve anything. You can do anything, anything they want to do. And that's very powerful, right? But such a system has a fundamental flaw. That is, what if the government sets out to do the wrong thing? Then it can be terribly wrong, right? It can be really wrong. So that's, in some way, you know, people talk about the Beijing consensus. That's a very powerful element. The state government control. That element still is very, 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 very powerful. Yes.
So many Western powers and people are very critical of how China treats its population with respect to human rights and freedoms. I was wondering, how did the Chinese government, or what does the Chinese government think about this, and also what do the Chinese people think about this?
I mean, it's hard to, certainly Chinese people, right? If you're talking about human rights, it's about how government treats its people, right? Citizens. You know, the human rights issue, right? There's separate, different categories, right? You have socio-economic rights, you have sovereign rights, you have political, social, civil rights. When we talk about human rights, I assume we're talking about human rights, we're talking about civil political rights, right? Right to assembly, freedom of religion, whatever. How does the Chinese government react to this? This certainly does not like that, right? You know, human rights issue is the most sensitive issue because you think about it, human rights is about how government treats its citizens, its people. It's very much like a parenting skill, right? I certainly don't want anybody to criticize my parenting. I love my kids, right? I may be harsh, I may spank them. No, I don't. But you see the sensitivity of that, right? So the government certainly is very touchy. They don't want that. But the people's reaction, of course, is that again, you know, it's a highly regulated, highly controlled environment, and really people's voice on the particular issue of human rights, on the civil political rights, that issue is clearly, muted. It's silenced in many ways. But it seems the populace is more concerned about economic rights. As Professor Riley once told me in Singapore, there was a slogan, "Give me liberty or give me wealth." There is probably that sentiment has some prevalence in Chinese society. The embrace of wealth, economic development has, because of that, human rights issue, political issue has taken a backseat. So in a nutshell, the government is not going to, again, probably comply on the human rights issue as desired by the West. So if you subscribe by the argument of liberal peace that countries that respect human rights do not fight war with each other, you probably would be disappointed. I don't think China will evolve into a Western-style democracy, and and they are going to pursue what they believe to be the right path, the right path for their political change.
Any other questions? Oh, that was,
Seeing as how the CCP is such an anxious body in that it's always worried about holding on to power within its domestic government, or just domestically, is there that same anxiety reflected on the international stage in its ability to gain power and maintain its current status?
So this hot domestic sort of repression translated into international.
Yes, sir.
I mean, that's probably one of the reasons why many people are so worried about the notion of Beijing consensus, right? Or somehow that the Chinese model would inspire many developing countries in the third world to emulate, to follow. What the Chinese government has been saying is, we're not trying to export our model. We're not trying to promote, the spread of our model. In fact, they're very shy about the notion of Beijing consensus, because I don't believe there's a consensus guiding Chinese reform and change in the past 30 years. The whole process has been really based on trial and error. There's no blueprint. The notion, again, in Chinese, there is this Chinese saying that it's very tiny, that you cross the river by groping for the stones. You do it by experimentation. You try whatever works. Trial and error, and sometimes works, sometimes does not. So far has worked well. So they even don't believe there's a confidence. They don't even feel confident there is a consensus out there. The Chinese model. What they're doing is manage, all these different issues to secure domestic front borders. Internationally, you don't have Taiwan explosion. You don't have U.S.-China trouble to stabilize its overall international environment. So clearly, it's but this is not to say that this China's domestic policy is not going to manifest itself in its foreign policy, right? You see its alliance with Sudan, with Venezuela, with other unsavory regimes. Much of it is driven by economic oil interest, but also there is a political dimension to it. And frankly, really, we don't know how the current crisis is going to play out. If we don't get our house in order, if the Chinese manage to escape the crisis unscathed, more or less, and the Beijing model will have greater appeal. In international relations, in a competitive environment, nothing succeeds like success. When you're doing well, everybody wants to emulate you. That's how essentially in the international environment, this is, we may say there's no consensus. We may, Chinese may not, but so long as they're doing so well, politically, there will be some implications.
We have time for one more question.
One more question.
The earthquake that took place at the beginning of the summer in the Sichuan province, how effective do you think the Chinese government was in addressing that and the human factor in both in the rebuilding of the infrastructure of the cities?
By all accounts, very, very impressive. Again, it's you compare that with our response to the Orient. Certainly is right.
The Burmese.
The Burmese, right? Cyclone incidents. Generally, all accounts, even the Western media, they generally feel higher on China's handling that. But of course, the crisis, itself reveals a lot of problems, right? A shabby building, the high school, elementary school building that caused a lot of death, and the unruly regional despots, right? The local leaders not responsive to the call of the top leader in handling the crisis expeditiously. But overall, they mobilized, right? The People's Liberation Army, and that's another key element of the People's mission. Is domestic mission, and it's different from our U.S. military forces, and they, in that sense, played a huge role. By the way, U.S. military actually, for the first time, Pacific Fleet, Admiral King sent 2 military aircraft carrying relief goods, and those landed in China. First time since the Flying Tiger, right? It's remarkable. But of course, military ties got into trouble again because our recent decision to sell Taiwan, $6 billion worth of arms package. So we went back to zero again. So with that.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That was a very good talk. I apologize for the technical difficulty and also the conflicting schedule beyond our control. Speaking of Flying Tiger, Chinese earthquake relief was very impressive, and we saw that, and the international media was allowed for the first time to report on harassed, shall we say. On the other hand, also reality is a very powerful thing. We saw the glacier part of Shanghai and Beijing and all other places, and then you go to the earthquake zone. While you see this effective Chinese earthquake rescue effort, you also see the other part of China that is a very poor and very underdeveloped, and that's reality. And speaking of the reality of today's talk, that is, I truly believe, I agree with them completely, 100%, that China does want to be involved in the international order and want to be open and there. The question is, does China, when it steps out its border, like the international reality, that is, the reality dominated by one single superpower? And it is in that, actually, it's a historical question that we go back to centuries, from the rise of Germany to the rise of Japan. And if things work out, we're right. If in the 1920s, if those Japanese progressive liberal wing of the government were not assassinated by the Japanese right-wing military guys, Japan probably would not have ended up having a war with us. So I think, Palisade organized a conference a couple years ago, I think in AFAC. Is a very good title. That's very, very good. It's China at the crossroads. It could go either way. I don't believe China is completely, beyond salvation or completely is a savior of the world. I mean, either way you can go, way. So that's why to make study China fascinating. So we're fortunate to have experts like Dr. Dan here to give us some guidance. And I think we're going to continue this theory. If you have any suggestions on topics, I'm thinking for the next few, we're going to talk about security, military, and the environment. We're going to line up some people to talk about those sort of things. And we'll be happy to hear some people from other departments, like Professor Wang's department of language, talking more about culture, which is very important. And unfortunately, she's on sabbatical, so thank you for coming today.
Well, thank you.
And that's it.
Thank you all for coming.